Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Colby thickness of in your DM slickness, the Cody Steele of sex appeal, the Anshul Jubbly of being lovely, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you following UFC 312, not good. Asterisk, couple of good fights, couple of good showings. I'm generally trying to be more positive in recent months, but this one was pretty lazily put together from the off. Most people in the know, and to be honest, most people not in the know were like, there's not a lot on that card. You know, if you got Justin Taffer, Jimmy Crute, and Jake Matthews on the paid portion of a pay-per-view, and you're having the gall to charge people $80 for it, you know, it's a bit, oh. And then, of course, like, we're all supposed to treat the main card like it's different, or like the prelims and the main card are the same thing, even though the main card's the bit you pay $80 for. And the prelims had some pretty good stuff on with Topuria versus Thickness and Rongzhu versus Steele, which, even if those fights didn't turn out good, they were between good fighters. Alexander Topuria is a very promising young prospect. Colby Thickness was pretty promising as a prospect too, even though he's a little bit less hyped than Topuria. And he was coming in at short notice. Rongzhu has shown tons of promise, and Cody Steele is a guy who people have been waiting forever to get to the UFC. Whereas everyone knows that Justin Taffer is not very good. And your main event, of course, was Dricus du Plessis versus Sean Strickland, which, the first fight wasn't very good. I said that on Twitter, and MMA Guru put up a post that was like, Guru followers versus Jack Slack followers, and it's a dude pouring a pint over his face and a dude sniffing wine. It made me chuckle. So, this is the weird thing. Some people are genuinely convinced that the first fight was like a banger. And even watching it again, even if you get like invested in the storyline and stuff, because Izzy versus Sean Strickland was not a banger in a banger sense, but it was very interesting to watch it unfold. It was exciting at the time to watch it unfold. Dricus versus Strickland 1, I was not. Yeah, watching it again, I was like, oh, this is not great. But Zhang Wei put on a clinic. Taliesin Teixeira did his job. There's lots of stuff to talk about. But we'll jump in straight away with the main event. Dricus du Plessis versus Sean Strickland. The belt remains in South Africa. On the Boycast, I was banging out my South African impressions, but they mainly just reverted to Moana's dad, which I am quite good at. Run right back to the water! It was called as good as my Kano from Mortal Kombat, which I have to go back deep into the archives to find. But yes, South African Bonkman continued his winning streak. I honestly thought this was an excellent performance from du Plessis, and it kind of... We're going to talk about the jab a lot today, because there were a few guys who really used the jab well in their fights. And Sean Strickland it's kind of like the old style of scientific boxing. If you go and read books from like the British boxers in the 1920s and 30s, the jab is all you need. And this was at about the time that American fighters were really getting into infighting, two-handed hitting, trying to knock everyone out. And you had guys like Jim Driscoll going like, oh, I just need the jab to take a man apart. And it's an odd thing, because the jab is like the most important punch, but you can fight well without a jab. And if you only have a jab, you're really stuffed if the guy starts going out of his way to shut it down. Like a really extreme example of someone with just the jab in boxing would be Tommy Loughran, who I wrote Advanced Striking 2.0 about. I talked about him on the history episode I did about Primo Carnera and all that. He was a light heavyweight, and he went all the way up to fight Primo Carnera at heavyweight. And Primo Carnera was 260 pounds. And Loughran was not a big light heavyweight. But he just had a jab, and it really was bizarre to watch, because he wouldn't throw his right hand almost at all. And it means you can stand, like in boxing, you can stand completely side on. So half of your body is like illegal for the opponent to hit, because it's your back. And then the other half you can cover with your right hand, and you just poke them with the left hand up the middle. But that obviously cannot work in MMA, where you can kick the leg if someone stands sideways. Or kick the upper body. If you throw a left high kick against someone standing sideways, you'll send them careening over backwards. They'll be stumbling out of their stance. And there are a lot of points in this fight, actually, where Sean Strickland takes kicks and stumbles around. And that always goes badly on the cards. Even if you don't get hit in the head by the kick, if it makes you, like, stumble, never a good look. But Dricus du Plessis, I joked about him being undefeated in rematches, because he's only had one rematch ever and he lost it. He beat Roberto Soldic in their first fight and then got knocked out in their second fight. This is only the second time he's rematched someone. But it's quite interesting because Sean Strickland has not... how many rematches has he had? I'm not seeing any, actually. Yeah, Sean Strickland hasn't had any rematches either. But it's quite intriguing because Sean Strickland brings a problem. And the problem is he's very good with his jab and he's very good at dealing with straight shots generally. He's quite good at dealing with like big looping shots in that he's got more time to react to them. But all that, like with his right hand, is always like in the middle of the path of your jab. He's always reaching for it, reaching to pat it. So he's taken away your scientific jabby weapon, and he's pretty good at avoiding big swings too. And then he just has to pop you with the jab every time you fail to connect one of yours. What du Plessis did in this fight, where the previous fight he'd bit on his mouthpiece and just been aggressive and got through it, and tried to outwork Strickland. This fight, he was clearly trying to outwork Strickland, but from the very beginning, he takes away Strickland's jab. So you can watch him, he fights with his hands high, and he's almost always got his hands open towards Strickland. He's ready to palm the jab. With his right hand would be the normal one to palm with, but he brings his left hand across and checks the jab with that hand too, which should open you up to the right straight from Strickland. But because Strickland so rarely throws his right hand, and it's so loopy and awkward when it comes, that you've got time to duck it. You've got time to avoid it. So Dricus is using both hands to palm or check Strickland's jab. The other important part of those first two rounds that you can watch is that he spends most of it... In fact, he spends most of the fight until he breaks Strickland's nose in, was it that round 4? He spends most of the fight going backwards. Not straight backwards, but leading Strickland around the cage. And one of the great things that does for him is that it means that Sean Strickland is always stepping onto that lead foot, because a lot of Strickland's stuff is like he sort of awkwardly works his way forward, but he's always sort of leaning back and getting on one leg, which makes kicking him in the lead leg quite hard. And it also means that he can keep picking his leg up and teeping you. Very hard to cover big ground and teep at the same time without really overcommitting. So Dricus keeps him walking forwards, and he's able to land the calf kick a few times off that. And then there was a whole heap of techniques that he clearly worked on just for Strickland. The reads he made between fights were fantastic because he came in with all this stuff prepared and it looked great. I mean, I know he likes to joke about people picking apart his fight footage and saying that he just goes for it. He put out a great quote this week, which was, the secret to blitzing is to take whatever the opponent has on your face and ignore it and just go through it, which is how he won the first fight, basically. But he makes these interesting reads, like the Rob Whittaker one. He said he has a lot of trouble with southpaws jabbing him. And then in the first fight with Strickland, he actually landed his southpaw jab a good amount. And in this fight, you can see him switch to southpaw, and he doesn't really jab with Strickland with his left hand orthodox. When he goes southpaw, he engages him in the hand fight. He touches Strickland's lead hand, and then he flicks his hand out to the side and then brings it back to the center and punches him straight in the face. And he's able to jab him really well from southpaw a few times in that fight. One of the really important things in this fight was the left high kick, which I think I've been saying forever, because always with Sean Strickland, we're talking about the fact that he occupies the center line with his right hand. If you occupy the line between the opponent's lead hand and your face with your glove, if you just put it there, they can't really jab you. They can move and you maybe lose their hand, but they have to change the line of the punch. Like, they can't go through your hand. So if your only concern is dealing with the opponent's jab, that would be perfect. The problem is, once you start reaching out like that for someone's jab, they can start coming around the side. So famously, of course, Alex Pereira. Jab, body jab, jab, body jab. Strickland's reaching all the way out for it, and he just leaps in with the left hook around the side, because Strickland's hand is well forward, his chin's up in the air. I think he was even on one leg for that one, because he's always on one leg for some reason. But that didn't have, that's not just because Alex Pereira's magic. Alex Pereira was helped along there by being quite tall and long, so he's able to get his left hook, leap forward and get it around the side really quite easily. But there's footage of a 50-year-old Ray Safo sparring with Sean Strickland, and he immediately comes out and goes body jab and leaping left hook, and Sean Strickland goes, "Oh, you bastard." But if a 50-year-old Ray Safo is catching you with that, it's not that Alex Pereira is so quick or whatever, it's that you're literally reaching out for the jab so far that you can't react in time if they come around the side. So if you're not as tall and long as Alex Pereira and you can't cover a lot of ground with a leaping left hook, the left high kick is a nice option. Which I was really disappointed we didn't see more from Izzy. Just throw the left straight and then left high kick off it. Don't even try and touch him with left straight. Just get him reaching for it. From southpaw, this is. But Dricus threw tons of left high kicks in this fight, and every time Sean had to pull his head back, try and get his arm up. He was never in position to deal with it until like round 3, at which point his right arm is out like he's doing a semaphore. He's got his elbow out away from his body, like he's Tom Cruise waving at the crowd pretending he knows people in it. It's so weird. But Dricus' left kick was a constant in this fight, and there were so many of those left kicks that just slapped Strickland around the face because he was never in position to deal with it. Now, du Plessis didn't knock him down or knock him out with it, but it was a constant stress on Strickland, and it opened up the left body kick because when Strickland started sticking his arm out high, trying to block the kick well away from his body, du Plessis was able to just kick underneath it. There were loads of times in this fight where Dricus went southpaw and then started the kick, paused, and then either went high or low depending on how Strickland reacted. There was also some really interesting stuff around like the double hand fight or just the hand fight generally. Because Strickland wants to cover your jab at all times or go out and palm it at all times, and Dricus wanted to palm or cover Strickland's jab at all times, they got into this double hand fight, which you'll see quite a lot in Muay Thai, and particularly in 4-ounce Muay Thai. If you see two good Nak Muay in 4-ounce gloves, they do a lot of this. So both guys have both hands out on the other's hands. Happened in a few good MMA fights too. Lyoto Machida versus Chris Weidman, Robbie Lawler versus Johnny Hendricks 2. Daniel Cormier did it a lot, but the trick with that is if you want to punch, you've got to get a hand free, which is normally like you have to whip it away and then throw it back. Or you have to try and fold their hands down and stuff like that. There's lots of little tricks you can do. What I really liked was that du Plessis would go southpaw, get into like a double hand fight with Strickland, and then he'd step forward into orthodox and pull his left hand back and whip it over the top in a left hook, and then throw the right straight. So after he broke Sean's nose, actually, that might have been one of the ones that broke Sean's nose, but after he broke Sean's nose, he hit him along the fence with that and really hurt him. That was the one that Strickland said he'd fixed his nose in the corner and then it re-broke as they crashed into each other along the fence. But that was when they crashed into each other along the fence and he grabbed his nose. Another one that you saw Dricus use, I think it was round 3, Strickland comes out and he really has both hands out there like a zombie on top of du Plessis' hands. And du Plessis throws like right straight, left jab, right straight again. And basically he goes into Strickland's hands twice. And as he pumps that jab out, he pulls his right hand back free of Strickland's hands and throws it over the top and hits him. It's really clever. I mean, if you watch Daniel Cormier's career, it was always like both hands on the opponent's hands and then pull your left hand back and whip it down the middle in a jab. It's getting the opponent's hands tied up and then freeing your hand just long enough to hit him. But yes, this fight demonstrated Sean Strickland has one approach. Oh, and then there was the problem with the teeps, which du Plessis dealt with mainly by pulling him forward the whole time. And when Strickland teeped, he had room to either pull his belly back or parry it down at the floor and kick it as the foot came down. But you saw du Plessis did not take an awful lot of teeps in this fight, where in the previous one he did. If you watch the Adesanya fight, obviously, the Strickland-Adesanya fight, the teep is a real problem for Izzy in that one. Oh, and one other thing that I really liked about du Plessis' kicking game, he's throwing the low kicks, but Strickland's still picking up his lead leg. And any time that Strickland was starting to do that and du Plessis was struggling to land the low kicks, he'd pick up his lead leg, his orthodox lead leg, left leg, and he'd throw the side kick, a cross-body side kick to the lead leg, like Rob Whittaker did lots against Yoel Romero. You're seeing more guys do that now. Piotr Yan did it against Figueiredo, and John Jones did it against Stipe to set up the Osotogari trip. But side kicking the lead leg, left leg to left leg. And when Dricus did that, he could pick his leg up above Strickland's check. When Strickland picked his leg up slightly to check the low kicks, du Plessis could stamp down on top of it. And even if you don't connect on the guy's leg while it's on the floor, you're probably not going to hurt him with the side kick. But at least you're not going to hurt yourself. So it's just foot on shin, pushing down. So I like that. But yeah, basically all of Sean Strickland's problems in this fight were that he has two weapons, the jab and the teep, and he doesn't know how to build beyond that, or he refuses to, and he doesn't have anything else he can use when that stops working. This was a real case of du Plessis. He shut down the jab, first of all, and he shut down the teep by bringing him forward constantly. But he also threw a ton of variety. He's doing things where he's like switching to southpaw and throwing the back kick, and it's just an idea in the course of 100 other ideas in the fight. Strickland, when the one thing doesn't get going, he doesn't have anything else. Nixick's in his corner going, when he switches to southpaw, I need that right straight down the centre. And it's like, Strickland's not going to do that. You know, you watched Nixick get more and more frustrated with him. Nixick commented on one of my previous podcasts when I was like, it was the Abyss fight, when I was like, he just wasn't hitting the body when Nixick was asking for it. And Nixick was like, yeah, we were annoyed at that or whatever in the comments. But yeah, he's a very hard fighter to coach because he's found something that works for hundreds of rounds of sparring and he's ingrained it as habit. And he doesn't have anything else. Whereas I can almost guarantee you, Dricus du Plessis went back to training and they said, we're going to get you in front of someone who's just going to throw hundreds of jabs at you. Because that first round was basically Dricus du Plessis going, right, let me test this shut down the jab stuff and then I'll get to work. And the annoying thing is that, like, Strickland, when he threw jab, right hook to the body, left hook upstairs, you know, his punching form is horrible on all his other punches. But when he threw 3 punches at a time, he had success. When he threw a body shot, he had success. But he was just huge swathes of this fight, the latter half of this fight, he's just paralyzed. Now, I appreciate he got his nose broken, and it was probably very uncomfortable. But this is the thing, like, we talk about toughness. And I don't doubt that Sean Strickland's tough. I mean, he just demonstrated it by getting punched on his broken nose a load of times. He's a tough dude. But there's tough, I can take a lot of punishment and I will survive through this. And then there's like having the mental toughness to say, I'm going to open up. I'm going to try and win this now. Maybe you'd consider that heart or something like that. But there's a lot of different things you can be saying with like one word in toughness. It's like Dom Cruz retired this week because he separated his shoulder for like the second time this year. And Dom Cruz is someone I would consider tough as nails in a fight context, but you cannot look at him and not say he's fragile because his body's let him down so many times. But if you say the word fragile, people go like, he's not fragile. He took the best shots from so-and-so and so-and-so. And it's like, you know, different context of the word. Sean Strickland is tough in terms of he took a kicking in this fight, but he was not tough enough to open up and take some risks. He was happy just coasting to a loss. And I get that his thing is sort of like conning people. It's like Mayweather, you know, Mayweather used to talk up every opponent he ever had, and then he'd make sure that rumours went around about how he got knocked down by Zab Judah in sparring, or he wasn't looking like his old self, because half of his thing was like getting people to tune in because they hated him. But like Sean Strickland's thing is getting people to tune in because he's such a badass and he's going to go to war. And he never, ever does. And this was even worse than any other fight. He just, the moment that jab stopped working, it was hopeless for him. And I think the really interesting thing is that if he took an honest look at himself and said, I need some other stuff. You know, I need to develop a decent kicking game that's not just the teep. I need to develop some combination punching. I need to be able to lead with my right hand sometimes. You know, or maybe even add a stance switch or something like that. There's a load of other things you can do. I need to be able to level change and threaten the takedown and then use that to start striking more effectively. I need to be able to corner people. If he did that, he could still develop into a much better fighter. But I think he's good enough with just what he's got that he's going to get trapped there at that level. Because he can jump in against like anyone else in the middleweight top 10. Maybe a few of them beat him, but he's going to be able to jab them up mostly. Unless they do look at this fight and say, oh, if you take away Strickland's jab, he has nothing. And priority one should be taking away his jab, not, I hit harder than him, I'll just keep trying to hit around his jab. But this sets up Dricus du Plessis versus Khamzat, which of course we're all very interested in. Trying to remember the last time, Brunson took him down, or wanted to take him down, and you got some interesting stuff out of Dricus on the bottom from there. But yeah, you know, I've no idea what to make of that fight. It's hard to bet against Khamzat Chimaev when he's looked so good. But then Khamzat Chimaev's weakness has been conditioning. And people, if you say that, people will go like, but he won those fights. So you're like, come on, you've got eyes. You saw that he was slowing down pretty badly against Burns and Usman. Meanwhile, du Plessis always looks a mess, but always looks a mess the same way in round 5 that he did in round 1. His conditioning has never been a problem. But that's the Khamzat dilemma. You know, you have to survive that far first. Co-main event was Zhang Weili versus Tatiana Suarez. This was another one like where we had so little information on Tatiana Suarez because of all her injuries and her time off. I was quite excited for it. And then I was watching the Andrade fight and I was like, oh, she's not really got a lot. And then this fight happened and it really was the case that she did not have a lot. She had a left kick to the body. She had the odd right jab as a southpaw. And she had level changes into scrambly shots that often didn't work out the first time and she had to sort of make good on them. So she got Zhang down in the first round. And Zhang played a bit half guard, bit half butterfly. Clearly wasn't able to get up that easily, but wasn't in danger. Second round was much more even, with Zhang landing a really good right hand on the chin on the way to a clinch. And then the third round, Suarez just lost it. She did not have anything. She's taking bad shots. She's shooting and then falling down into the bottom of the sprawl. And then Zhang starts taking her down. And then Suarez is stuck out on the feet and having to try and strike. And Zhang looked so sharp. Every time Suarez jabbed, she came back with the right hand and the left hook, or the 1-2. She was hitting her clean on the chin. She was throwing a ton of right straights to the body. And round 3, she lands the hardest tip punch I've ever seen. She's just like, the sound on it was like, whack. So respect to Tatiana Suarez, because we saw her last the other day tap out from tip punch. And even when she was gassed, Suarez didn't look bad on the floor. Zhang got on top, and she likes trying to like use the jiu-jitsu that she's been learning from people like Josh Hinger. And she starts doing a knee cut, and Tatiana Suarez underhooks her. So she tries to backstep onto the legs, and Tatiana Suarez follows her with the hook, throws her off the top. It was pretty slick from both of them. But then Tatiana Suarez was like, I'm tired, and tried to grab a guillotine and lay on her back. And Zhang was like, I'm not tired, and just carried on. I think Suarez, we inflated her because of like the winning and the possibility of this incredible wrestler grappler against Zhang. I think maybe the idea of the fight blinded us to the fact that even in the moment against Andrade and people, she was not looking super impressive, and she hadn't developed much. You know, she had a load of fights in the UFC before she got really badly injured, but she's never really developed anything more on the feet. And Ghost did some tape study for Zhang. If you don't know, Ghost is he's on Twitter and he's on Instagram. Cool guy. And he does some really good tape study. But he was talking about Patchy Mix and Tatiana Suarez both do this thing where they slap the lead hand and then they throw the body kick, which meant that timing the right hand counter just means wait for them to slap your hand. But that's quite interesting that they both do the same thing, because Patchy Mix was her head corner and the whole thing is that they're dating. It's like, it does my head in. Like, it's not... Firstly, I think there's a double standard. I think any male MMA fighter, if you were like, would you like your wife, even if they're like a top 10 fighter in the world in their division, would you like your wife to be your head corner? You'd be like, no, she won't be able to make objective decisions when I'm getting hurt or whatever. Whereas dudes are like, oh, I'll corner you, babe. So I joked about Zhang being decades ahead of the game by not having her husband in her corner. But think about who else doesn't. And it's like, yeah, Valentina's got this weird parental relationship with her coach, who's also married to her sister. But again, not her partner. And Nunes doesn't have her partner in her corner. She has an actual fucking team. Meanwhile, Rose Namajunas succeeded in spite of... Well, she did have Trevor Whitman at the time, actually. But Pat Barry was always there, glomming on. And Tatiana Suarez for this one had Patchy Mix there. And she's just going, get a proper coach. Treat it like it's your profession. I don't even know how the money stuff breaks down, because for a proper coach and a proper chief corner, you would pay them. But are you going like, oh, babe, we can save some money by you being my chief corner? No, get someone who's going to be objective with you, tell you off when you're doing bad things, and throw in the towel when you're getting hurt too much, which I think there is far too little of in MMA. All these cornermen who are like, oh, but we lose 50% of the 10% that we get from him if he doesn't win. Just let Anthony Smith die out there. But it is wild. The women's MMA partner in your corner trope. The only one worse is Devin Clark's dad being in his corner, because Devin Clark was mainly famous for getting the shit kicked out of him in the UFC, and his dad would just be screaming over the top of his coach's actual advice, which was normally like, Devin, stop throwing the hook kick. You're a light heavyweight. But anyway, Zhang looked great. Looked great everywhere. I think certainly coming into this, I was quite interested because she spent so long working on her wrestling and grappling, specifically for like the last 3 opponents. I thought perhaps her striking would slip a bit, but she looked fast and sharp as ever in this one. And I also said she's 35, and we've got to keep an eye on that. The 35 curse. Certainly in men's MMA below lightweight. However, in women's MMA, strawweight is actually like welterweight. What else went on the card? Talisman Teixeira knocked out Justin Taffer. Classic Taffer boys. Come in with the morbid obesity BMI and win or lose very quickly. Yeah, it was fine. Teixeira moved into the cage, freed an arm, elbowed him in the face. It was brutal. Jimmy Crute and Rodolfo Bellato had a pretty fun scrap. The fight started with Bellato. He got an overrun clinch, and he went to trip Jimmy Crute, and he missed the leg, and he fell on his back, banged his head on the floor at the same time as he pulled Jimmy Crute into mount. And I went, oh, it's going to be one of those fights. And then Jimmy Crute beat the piss out of him for the rest of the first round. He was on his way to a comfy 10-9, and then he dropped him at the end of the round. And Bellato dropped like Jorge Masvidal doing the planking celebration, and again hit his head off the floor. And he went, ooh, very easy 10-8 to score there. But then Bellato actually pulled it back in the second and third and got a justified draw. You don't see very many of these, but guy dominates round 1, gets the 10-8, and then loses round 2 and round 3 on closer margins. And that's how you end up with your majority draw. But a decent fight, even if it's light heavyweight, unranked guys on the main card of a $80 pay-per-view. Then Jake Matthews boxed up Francisco Prado in a fight that I loved checking out the Reddit opinions on this, because people were just like, oh, great, he looked really good. Can't wait for him to fight someone slightly better and look terrible again, because this is Jake Matthews. He'll come out and we all expected him to get murked by Fialho, who was on an amazing run at the time, and he just broke Fialho's chin. Fialho lost 5 fights in a row by knockout back-to-back off that. And then in the moment he meets someone a little bit better, he just looks awful. Jake Matthews, this is. Gotta be a confidence thing. Gabriel Santos versus Jack Jenkins. That was pretty good, I thought. Do I have a lot to say about that? I mean, it was quite interesting that Jenkins threw a front kick to the face, and about a minute and a half later, Santos was like, right, I'm going to front kick you in the face now. Managed to hold off the temptation to immediately throw it back. Held off and then front kicked him in the face for real and actually caught him, and then got on the back and got the rear naked choke. Another one of those classic ones where if you saw Santos had the body triangle, but it was in a position where Jenkins was on one arm. He was propped up on one arm. And at that point, we talk about this all the time at the moment because it's what the Dagestani fence wrestler, it's basically what every good fence wrestler in MMA does at the moment. They get you to hold your weight because they get you into a position where you are halfway up and you are convinced that if you give up trying to get up and go to your back, you've given up everything. And that's much worse. When really holding your weight on one arm or both arms stops you from hand fighting so they can choke you. If you watch all the rear naked chokes by good fence wrestlers are coming there. They're not coming when the guy turns, when they're on their back flat in the middle of the cage or even flat against the fence. It's not classical rear naked choke territory. It's getting guys as they're getting up. You could even watch that fight, Khamzat versus Rob Whittaker. When Rob Whittaker rolls off the fence and he just has Khamzat on his back, in what is supposed to be a very bad position, he's actually pretty safe and gets up and away. He gets caught when he's trying to stay up along the fence and Khamzat's half on his back and then grabs his neck. Or teeth, as it turned out. I'm going to keep saying it, but someone at some point is going to work out that rolling to your back and making the position technically worse, but not as bad from a striking and defending chokes perspective, is actually the secret to beating, or one of the ways that you could beat a fence wrestler when you get into bad positions. What else did I like? Oh, Topuria. Let's talk about Alexandra Topuria versus Colby Thickness. Did I say Cody Thickness at the start in my pun? I think I did. But this fight was very interesting because it was Topuria versus Thickness. Topuria, quite similar in style of boxing to his brother Ilia Topuria, and obviously the coach of Ilia Topuria. He took some time off to help Ilia get into the UFC, which I think is really noble, to put your career on hold because you think your younger brother's more talented, and then resume your career. It's not like he was trying to get out of doing it. And Colby Thickness was a late notice replacement, but he's a teammate and he was being coached by Alexander Volkanovski. And there were some very interesting comparisons to the fight between Ilia and Volk. Alexander Topuria, he comes in behind the lead shoulder and he pokes that ramrod jab, which I really like, pushing the guy towards the fence. He's a right-hand heavy fighter like his brother, but he's creating openings for the right hand. He's not just out there throwing the right hand. So getting the guy along the fence, making him circle into it or jab off the fence. If you watch that, like the times Thickness got caught were almost exactly the same as when Volkanovski got caught by Ilia Topuria. It was like, I've got my back to the fence and I'm trying to run around the fence, but I'll poke out this jab with my head in the air at the same time, and then he just comes across the top with the right hand. It's trying to punch from a position where you should be just focusing on yourself and defense. But then out in the open, Topuria would try and slip a couple of punches. If every time the Thickness doubled the jab out in the open, Topuria would root his feet to the floor, move his head, and Thickness could catch him with the right hand. And that's something that you saw from Bryce Mitchell against Ilia Topuria. That's a crazy fight because there are elements of Ilia Topuria's style that are shown up there on the feet by Bryce Mitchell, who is not a very good striker. Certainly not a very threatening or dangerous striker. But that getting him to slip punches out in the middle of the cage, when you're not back to the fence and in bad cage position, where if he swings the right hand back, you can actually move, you can slide back onto your back foot. If you're jabbing when you're like trying to circle around the cage, you don't really have anywhere to go when he throws back. But if you're standing in front of him out in the open and you're pumping the double jab, he'll move his head side to side and he'll root himself to the floor. And that's when you can land a low kick. That's when you can follow him with the right hand. And Thickness landed loads in this fight. And that's when Bryce Mitchell hit his double leg, completely undefended by Topuria, who is a very strong wrestler. You can be like, oh, he didn't respect Bryce Mitchell's hands or whatever, but he did respect Bryce Mitchell's takedown attempts, and he let him complete that takedown attempt and take the rest of the first round. Not let, as in like allowed him to, but it happened because he was busy slipping jabs. But I love the Topuria's boxing style. That lead shoulder high, coming in behind the jab, body jabbing, just jab straight in front of the shoulder, lovely. And then hoping the right hand comes back, you roll it off and throw your right hand, or they circle out to your right and you throw the overhand across the top of their jab. It's really simple, but that doesn't mean that it's easy, or that it won't work against very high-level fighters. Oh, and there was a dope suplex in this as well. And the ground stuff was mainly Topuria. But there was some good scrambling. I quite liked Colby Thickness's work with the Kimura, even though DC was like, the moment he went for the Kimura, he stopped getting up. And he did sort of, get himself stuck on the ground there. But it's always worth a go. If you've got a stronger wrestler, the Kimura grip is a great way of turning a wrestling exchange into a grappling/submission exchange. So the one I always use is early UFC era. Corey Sandhagen did a good job with the Kimura trap. Salkilde versus Jubli. Really short fight. Jubli was... I feel for him because he was winning his first fight in the UFC until the guy started barking at him like a dog, and he got so thrown off that he ended up losing. But this one, he came out... They're saying how he feels he has the edge in the boxing, and then he gets knocked out while they're saying it. It was 19 seconds. But there was something in this fight that I talk about from time to time. Another great example is Martin Kampmann versus Johnny Hendricks, and it's bouncing. It's quite interesting because there are, there's loads of people who use bouncing footwork really well. We just had an MVP fight where he used his bouncing footwork really well. But guys get into the habit of bouncing on the spot sort of nervously, and they'll bounce forward and back, and then they'll bounce back and forward. They'll go forward, back, forward like that. And you can sort of predict or take a guess at when they're going to bounce forward and forward and back again. And if you throw when they're bouncing forwards, they're in range. Often their feet aren't on the floor. So Martin Kampmann versus Johnny Hendricks is a good example because in the slow-mo, you can see Martin Kampmann see the punch, but he's not in control of, he's not able to push off and move. And he gets dinged in the head and knocked out. But you do have to be careful with bouncing. It's obviously there's lots of guys who use it very well to hide their entries, but very early on it's like throwing a naked low kick. I'm always saying, like, don't commit to a big forward movement if you've not got a bit of a read on how the guy's moving, because he can just. I'm not saying Salkilde even timed him. If he steps forward as you're bouncing in, he doesn't have to counter you. He can just hit you in the face with his eyes closed, and he'll still have a great effect on you because you can't move. Another example is like Rong Zhu in his fight against Cody Steele, which was really good. Check that fight out. Best fight on the card by a long way. Rong Zhu was looking for this right uppercut because Cody Steele was throwing a jab and then trying to dive on his legs. So it works really well if the guy just wants to jab and duck, jab and shoot. you just keep throwing that right uppercut to try and catch his head as he ducks onto it. But he showed it twice, and I don't know if Cody Steele saw that, or if Cody Steele just said, I'm going to step in and throw a right hand. But the next time he jabs, he throws the right hand afterwards, and Rongzhu's got both hands down throwing this uppercut, gets dinged along the fence, and that was probably the worst punch that Rongzhu took in the fight. But otherwise, Rongzhu looked great. I think he's a really interesting fighter. I think he lost his last one, did he? He's a really compelling prospect because he's got 30 fights, and he's 24 years old. He's had one run in the UFC already at 24. Earned his way back. In that one, he met a decent wrestler, and just the guy couldn't get him down at all. He's big for the weight class, and I think he's got really good hips. So rather than having to like commit his hands to takedown defense, he'll let guys shoot in on him. He'll get the whizzer, he'll threaten throws and things like that, and he'll get away. I think he's a very interesting type of striker because I think if he meets other slick strikers, he might not do as well. But if he's meeting grapplers who could beat those slick strikers, he'll do very well on the matchup. Because in this one, Cody Steele couldn't get him off his feet. He did once in the very early going, but Rongzhu managed to old school wrestling headlock and roll through, which is legit. You know, Charles Oliveira did it to Kevin Lee. But Rongzhu looked great in this one. I think he's probably left-handed because it was jab, inside low kick with the left leg, and left hook that were just the constant. You saw a lot of, he'd square his stance and he'd throw the right straight as a poke to set up a big swing with the left hook. Roy Jones's old favourite. Loved his jab. He'd go body jab and then jump with the left hook around the side, just like we were talking about with Alex Pereira. If you can get the guy reaching with his right hand for your jab or your body jab works even better because if they're reaching down and forwards, you've got so much room to swing that left hook around the side when you jump in. Added a load of calf kicks, got into some crazy exchanges. I mean, he didn't get away scot-free. He was bruised up by the end, but for the most part, he was hitting Cody Steele at will, and he was getting away from a lot of Cody Steele's punches. I really liked how he used high elbows defenses too, you know, the crazy monkey type stuff, Quentin Jackson stuff, where you bring your elbow up. Sometimes they call it like an answering the phone thing, but where you bring your elbow up high to take blows on your arms. You do open up your body, but Cody Steele was not really attacking the body that much, even though he did on the Contender Series. That's another one of those ones where it's like, I do these high-level things, but only when I'm very confident I'm better than the opponent. When really those high-level things are the things that should win you or should be used in close matches to bring you ahead of the guy. But yeah, Rongzhu just looked phenomenal here. I think it was interesting. They were talking about this, the Australian Commission or whatever commission we're under in Sydney. They have the weigh-ins 12 hours earlier or something like that, so you get 12 more hours to rehydrate. And the commentators were talking about that, like everyone on the card was taking great shots without getting knocked out, or for the most part. I think a lot of guys looked good cardio-wise, and I think a lot of guys took a lot of big shots and didn't seem that badly shaken by it. Of course, it's all anecdotal and bro science, because that's what combat sports are. You can't actually fund studies on, you know, you can't line people up and hit them in the head for studies. But from what we know about deaths in the sport and hydration practices or dehydration practices, head trauma seems to affect you worse if you're dehydrated. So another 12 hours to rehydrate would be great, I think. Because if the weigh-ins are 12 hours earlier, the cut is exactly the same. It's just that you get more time to recover. You're being forced to rehydrate. And obviously, once they get off the scales, everyone wants to just get back to normal, pack on a ton of water, and feel good again. In boxing, they played with a lot of ways of doing it. I think Arturo Gatti was one of the guys who got it changed because the stories were like, oh, he'd come in 15 pounds heavier on the night than he did for the weigh-ins. And you hear that now and you go, oh, how quaint. This is MMA where guys are turning up like 27 pounds heavier. But that's a wrestling thing. That's something we've got to thank the wrestling for. Anyway, it was an all right card. I don't know what we got going on next week, but I'll have a chat about it on the Patreon. And I might even write something because I like to. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Dricus du Plessis, body built by Biltong Bless.